Well, here we are.
Hey, Dan.
Welcome to another edition of Humpday Hangout. My name is Dan Degryse. My co-host is Rob Fisher, and we are, if you're here, we're here with Straight Talk. I'm going to let Rob introduce our special guest, Captain Greg Rudiger. Rob.
Well, before I introduce Greg, how are you doing, buddy?
Me? Oh,
Yeah.
dude,
Yeah.
I am doing great. I'm doing
Yeah.
great. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. You're looking good.
Notice I didn't say good, because good then gets followed up with another question, right? Don't mind my mic here, but
These
no,
fancy
I'm doing great.
The fancy effects you got going on, you don't even realize it. It's blinking out your mic. You just need a big old poster board with all your sponsorships behind you, and that way your mic's out there and everything. You could even put a little sponsor thing on your mic. It would be cool. All right, you don't get what I'm talking about, do you?
No, I hear. I'm picking up what you're laying down. But let's get to the show.
Yeah. All right. We're gonna get to the show. I'm sorry. I've been excited to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. Well, welcome everybody. And our guest today is a good friend of mine from where I used to work in Washington State. And Greg's a multi-generational firefighter out of SoCal, and maybe we'll get into how he got up to the state of Washington. It's not just because he sold his expensive house and came and bought a lot of property in Washington and was ruining it for everybody in the Seattle area. But Greg moved up to Washington and got hired on in a department neighboring to mine. We had a lot of common interests, being that we were truckies, and so we were teaching a lot of the similar stuff. We shared a lot of ideas. The county was moving in a direction, and so we were sharing a lot of ideas with truck operations, and he had a company that was teaching truck operations. Along the way, somehow Greg ended up dealing with some PTSD, still dealing with today, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. And now he's the peer support coordinator for his department. And being a peer support coordinator as well, we had the opportunity to collaborate on a few things before I retired. And I thought with everything that's going on and everything that's moving forward in the county and Greg's experience and his new consulting company, that he would be a great guest for the show. So I welcome you, Greg Rudiger. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Robbie. I really appreciate it. Dan, pleasure. Can't even see your mic right now. I'm using good old-fashioned Walkman headphones. So.
Well, I'll start things off. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. What was your upbringing like, being a multi-generational firefighter, SoCal firefighter? Maybe get into, how you got up to Washington and kind of that lays the groundwork of, how we met.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, I'm third generation. My grandfather and my dad, both retired captains from LA County. Both of my brothers, Scotty and Chris, they're both captains with LA County. So I was the one I teased them that could think for themselves. And I worked for the city of Corona. I got hired at Corona early 2000s. And that's where I made my career, promoted engineer, and was part of the USAR team and on the truck company there, and did a bunch of stuff. Also working with a little bit of peer support through my department at Corona. So before I even moved up here, I was involved in that. So obviously growing up in a fire station, I got pictures of me standing in front of LA County Engine 17 with my dad and grandpa. So from my earliest recollection, I was raised in a firehouse, and that's kind of how it was, old school fire department. And it was funny. I was just talking to my mom this week, and she was laughing about Emergency being back on TV. And she's like, "Oh, Greg said we have video recordings, the old VCR of him saying when he grows up he wants to be a fireman." So yeah, it was in my blood. It's what I knew. And it really was my dream, from the time I was a kid. And that I worked hard. I started as a volunteer at La Habra Heights coming out of high school. I think everybody in SoCal worked at La Habra Heights. So it was pretty awesome to build that community, and then got hired at Corona. And then, in fact, I even had to make the difficult choice. I didn't move forward in LA County's process just because I was pretty and rooted at where I was in Corona, and it was a great family environment there. And my dad was super supportive of me staying there, and then had some family issues and was married, had 2 kids, and my boys wanted moving up to the state of Washington where their mom is from. And that was in 2012, 2011. And then I commuted for a couple of years. My kids were small and it just was wearing on me. And so I just couldn't do the commuting thing with my kids being small, I was missing baseball games and doing 27 days in a fire station down in California and working overtime. It was, again, laying the groundwork for things to come. And so then I lateraled. I took a test. I actually got hired at North Shore Fire Department initially and started there. And then District 1, they did a lateral test. And so that's where I moved over. The irony is when I was trying to get hired, I tested with Robbie's department, the former District 7, and they hired another guy who was a known commodity. So I almost wound up working with Rob, which would have been awesome. But I landed there, and now we're South County Fire, and I've worked myself up through the ranks and got back to captain, and then I spent time on the truck. And through a series of events, which I'm sure we'll discuss, I wound up diagnosed with PTSD in 2018 and was one of the first in the state of Washington L&I PTSD worker comp, and battled that and I battled it. I never really addressed it. So part of what we'll talk about. And then a good friend of mine came to me and said, hey, you're L&I. You could probably use to come offline and come to light duty. And my boss, my good buddy, Mike Hudson, who's the DC Health and Safety, obviously I was already running peer support. It was like, hey man, we could do a lot of good stuff here for you. And maybe it's time you change your trajectory. And that was a tough pill to swallow because my whole life, and Robbie, my dream was to be a truck captain. And I thought my whole life through everything that I had done, right? I'm one of the lead instructors at Rio Hondo Truck Academy, helped launch that and grow that program down in SoCal. Whole career spent on the truck. So that's what I thought my calling was. And then to have that kind of uprooted, and then, I'm never going to go to days, we all say. Yeah. And then wound up landing on days, where right now I'm still technically on light duty, and we're working towards a position in that division. And that's where I'm at. And
okay.
You're supporting some other things.
Yeah. Before we get into, because Danny's going to have the second question here, and before we get into the whole department, where it's going with peer support and all that, just roughly how big the department is, so everybody kind of has an idea, because South County doesn't mean anything to some of our listeners.
We don't have a cool name like Surfer, Snohomish Regional Fire and Rescue, or South County Fire.
You're jealous.
You're right. I mean, almost all my bucket lists have been checked. I worked on the North Shore. I worked on Rescue 51. Right, I got to be a tillerman, and then I got to work for Surfer, and then it would complete the dream in the fire service. I work for South Snohomish County Fire. We're 15 stations. We cover from South Everett down to the King County line. So Everett, we're covering Mill Creek now. We cover Edmonds. We do cover Linwood, and we cover unincorporated Briar, Mountain Lake Terrace, and we cover unincorporated Snohomish County.
And how big?
So 350 line personnel. So our span, our whole organization, we're about 425 people with our staff and volunteers. And we have extended, and we'll get into some of the programs that we're running, from administrative wellness to our peer support, that we cover it for everybody, not just our operational people. It's our entire organization is represented, including now our retirees and family.
Yeah. And I will say that South County is cutting edge, especially these days. And you guys are a good size, very good suburban department.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry.
Oh no, it's good, Dan. I was just going to say we're cutting edge, like Rob said, but at some point we'll talk. We're outrunning the siren a little bit sometimes. So being on here has just been a complete blessing, and very humbled to be able to share this.
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks. Thanks for being here, to sharing your journey. Right, we're all on a journey. not any one thing defines us, but I would like to say at the forefront of this is why we're talking about resilience. And you mentioned the word PTSD. I think any chief officer or any firefighter that kind of heard your resume would be like, I want that guy on my company. It shouldn't be defined as, oh, he or she has PTSD or he or she is different. And that's what this platform is all about, to have a conversation about what we experience. We have done that historically through the physicality aspect of it, but not necessarily the mental health aspect of it. So thanks to, Bobby Halton, thanks to the current editor-in-chief, David Rhodes, Fire Engineering, to allow us to have this platform. It was funny because Rob and I were talking just before the show, and we're like, my memory is not always the best. And I'll probably forget Rob's name and your name during this show. Anybody that knows me knows that will happen. But I'm like, hey, Rob, how long we've been doing this show? A couple years. And then he looked back, he goes, I think more than 3 years. And it's actually been over 5 years where Chief Halton used to jump on the show and have this conversation, which wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. So again, thank you. And it's surprising that you were even willing to come on the show, since Rob didn't let you on his department. I won't get into that now. I'll just lay it there.
See, he already forgot the question.
I'm pausing there. I'm letting that last statement stay. If you've ever done and taken a class on active listening, you have to pause. All right. Don't be a blurter.
All right.
So thanks for that. So how many years then, Greg, have you been in the fire service altogether, from whether it be volunteer and all that? Please say more than 36.
36 minus 10.
Okay, 26. All right. There's somebody that's in this group here that has been in there for 36 years. He likes to lead with that and has a tendency to be a topper. But we'll work on that. So, and here's the thing is it's so cool to talk to people like yourself, right? There's so many people that do listen to this show. If they look at you, they're like, okay, I'm going to assume 6'3", athletic, put a couple pike pole and Halligan or axe in your hand, and you're going to go through anything. But for the most part, we don't know what's behind the face. Not only for me, but Rob and you. And Rob and I have had these conversations for the better part of, I'm going to say 8 to 9 years. And while there might be some tragedy, there is some triumph, and which is really cool with your R.A.D logo, right? That's pretty cool in itself. What does R.A.D stand for?
It stands for Resilient Another Day. And
okay.
The irony is it started. My wife's like, "You're traveling, you're teaching. You need to have a company, like not just Greg Rudiger." And so, what do you want to call it? And I'm like, R.A.D. She's like, "No, seriously." I'm like, "No, R.A.D. Like R.A.D training, R.A.D TNC, like surfing. That's me. If I could change my last name to Rudiger, I would, but my dad would get pissed. So, I would be R.A.D. And so that's kind of who I am, and it's what I do. And then part of that was like, people would ask me, well, what does R.A.D stand for? And I'm like, nothing. And they're like, it's just R.A.D. And I'm like, there, you said it. So I they were my own catch line. And then I was talking to a friend of mine out of Laguna Beach, Mount Rolfe, and he was going through some stuff, and he was talking about my adventure. And I said, my goal is to live resilient, to be resilient another day. And he goes, that sounds like R.A.D. And I'm like, it is. And he goes, no, it sounds like R.A.D. And I'm like, it is. And I wasn't even putting 2 and 2 together. And then, like I said, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I called my wife, and I was like, organically, what I had put into play, I don't believe there's any coincidences. One of my mottos is no coincidence. And so saying that I was R.A.D initially to be me and the surfer and the kind of don't take me too serious, actually evolved into where I am today and the calling that I'm supposed to be with being resilient another day.
Well, excuse me. I'm a firm believer, better lucky than good. I'm sure you're good at a lot of things. And I do want to get to the resilience part. I know Rob and I do. I know the audience does. We don't want to leave people with a, not your story, but we never want to leave people with a sad story or just the doldrums of what happened, because everybody's got a story, right? The purpose of this show is to kind of touch on that and then lead to really what resilience is. I have some thoughts. I'd love to hear yours, but take us down the path that brought you here, in a sense of whether it be the symptomology, the diagnosis, and yeah.
Yeah, it was, it's a cumulative thing. I don't even like using the term PTSD, right? Just like it has it's such a broad, it's the umbrella, it's the catch. It's really not a disorder, right? It's a cumulative effect that we have of the post-traumatic stress. And the more research and study we do, right, we understand that it's actually a brain injury, that we've rewired neural pathways, and that we're struggling with those things that we hold on to. Part of what I dealt with was, again, I say my blessing is my curse sometimes, that being third generation and living that, and, being a Rudiger in the fire service and being Guy Rudiger's kid was truly an honor. And then to have that, stigma of, being tough and, have a beer, go fishing, we'll go surfing, you'll be fine. As the job evolves, maybe that's not everything, and the cumulative effect of what we deal with. And I was doing what I thought was, raised watching John Wayne films, right? Wow, just shoving it down in the basement and shoving it down in the basement and shoving it down in the basement. And we never really address it. And eventually it overflows, right? The basement can only take so much stuff, and then it overflows. And so eventually what happened was I had a call where a kid rode into a bike on a little mini bike into a chain. We wound up criking him and everything. I was holding C-spine all the way to Harborview, and all I could see was my kid's face. And they had just got dirt bikes, and, it really troubled me. And of course, I went into peer support mode for those around me, right? Because that's what we do. That's why we're a success, because we help others. And I never really helped myself, and I didn't address it. And I was taking it out on my wife and kids. I was dumping the trauma on them. And we talk about, like we use a stress continuum with the colors, right, of green, yellow, orange, red. I was operating in red thinking I was in green, right? And then I'm at home being a complete ass, dumping, yelling at my kids, just very destructive at work, very destructive at home. And the whole time, like, what, honey? No, I made dinner. What? I'm a good husband. No, kids, I coach your baseball. I'm a good dad, right? And the whole time I'm living in this denial, right, of destructive behavior, and not even aware of it, right? Because we're not aware of it, and we hide from that stigma. And I didn't have the strength, and it came to a head with that call and a friend that came to me and said, man, you're really struggling. This isn't you. Usually you're fun. You're very jovial at work, right? You're always happy. There's, right, people hate you in the morning because I'm a morning person and everybody else isn't. And my wife, we had just been married. My wife, is she's my rock. She got to a breaking point where she called my best friend up there, who worked with Rob Chevy, and was like, you got to get him out of here. Like, I can't do this. And, on the brink of another second divorce, kids not wanting to talk to me. And yeah, I mean, basically telling my family I was going to kill myself in front of them, and almost driving off the road into a tree because we live in the country, and really battling what I call the darkness, right? Because it's real. And the way I equate it is it's like falling asleep. You never consciously know that moment that you're going to fall asleep, right? And that was how I was afraid of the darkness. I wasn't aware of that moment that I might just swerve off into a tree or worse. And yeah, I'd hit rock bottom, and I wasn't in a good place, and I wasn't in a good place at work. And I was on the verge, like I said, of a second divorce, I was on the verge of my kids not wanting to talk to me, right? They were disconnecting and physical harm. And, I listen to a lot of podcasts now, on resiliency, and Sean Ryan and Chad Robichaud were having a conversation. I heard Chad make the comment that he heard that, we hit rock bottom. Well, it turns out rock bottom's a pretty good foundation to build on. And I hit rock bottom. And, I'm a firm believer that through inspiration or desperation, we change. And again, I hit rock bottom and I was at desperation and I had no choice but to turn. And thank God my wife, truly, thank God my friends and family were there, and my department to give me an outlet. And then I was able to turn to my faith and my family, and I'm alive.
So that's a lot. I always ask and Rob knows this, is when somebody shares stuff, people are listening, and the person that's speaking goes through a lot of stuff, both emotionally, physically, and mentally. My first thought was, on a scale from 1 to 10, where are you at now? But I'm going to actually ask you currently, because you had some, a visceral response. Where does that come from, and how do you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
Vulnerability equals validity.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't be vulnerable, then I'm not valid. If I can't be honest, if I don't expose. The reason I got to where I was is because I bottled it up and I lived in fear and I lived in hiding and I lived in denial, right? If I can be vulnerable and I can be who I am and I can share this with you, then I'm valid. And then maybe the one person out there who's listening to this is like, man, I'm going through the same thing. And if he can be vulnerable, I can be vulnerable and ask for help, because I came through it. I came through on the other side. And like I said, I built a foundation on rock bottom. And yeah, there's a visceral response. And it's not so much of we don't live a victim mentality. I don't live in fear. I don't live in regret. I'm thankful. I live in a state of gratitude for those experiences that I had to be here today to share, because I'm here. I'm resilient another day. And so that visceral response is more tears of joy, I think, than sadness of what I went through. Obviously, the trauma I put on my wife and my kids and my family, I would say inexcusable, but it happened. And so now it's a chance for me to rise out of the ashes and to be the husband and father to them, and to lead my family and to impact other human beings in a way to where they can hopefully share this, right? What's the old adage? We touch one person, they're going to touch 7 others. Right. And so that's all we're trying to do, is if I can reach one person today, right? Plus this is healing for me. Every time I do this and every time I get this out and I share this story, the neurobiology, my neural pathways, my resiliency, I become stronger. I become healthier, right? The story becomes easier to tell, and like Robbie jokes, we're all talkers. But when it comes to this stuff, this has been a challenge for me to put myself out on social media and tell this story, right? Fighting a little bit of that, but I think it's important. It's healing for me. And like I said, I just hope that one person out there hears this and knows that it's okay not to be okay, but we're going to get through it together.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because I had an assumption. We all judge, right? We all try to say, be not judgmental, but you're going through an emotion. It's like, they, potentially got too far. But the assumption that I had was that it was a favorable response, and emotion is good. Not emotion is not good. Isolation and the lack of emotion is, in my opinion, a lot worse than somebody that can feel. And that's part the whole resiliency thing that we'll get into. So thanks for showing that. And this isn't scripted, right? This is 2 guys asking another person questions and real stuff. So thanks, Cap. Rob?
Yeah, Greg, I appreciate you sharing. It's not always easy to share those personal stuff, and especially when, knowing you, you're pretty good at what you do, and when you have to show that you're struggling through something, again, it's not easy to talk about. And so it goes to the vulnerability piece, which I think more firefighters need to be vulnerable. It would help us out in our profession. But I want to get into, because you and I had talked, and I want to get into, like, what did you end up doing after it got identified, after you realized that you needed to change some stuff, and you got family involved and friends involved. What course did you end up taking for treatment, or who did you guys reach out to? How did that all come together?
Yeah, I went through a series of talking with a couple of friends, right? And then my wife is really kind of my guide on this adventure and healer, and again, standing by me and helping me with some of those things. She runs a wellness spa here in Washington, so she has a little bit of a background in that, and with energy stuff that she does was very powerful, even though I didn't want to believe it, right? Again, the macho in me is like, I'm not doing that woo-woo stuff, right? I'm not doing meditation. I'm not doing breath work. I'm not doing yoga, right? I was still in denial of that stuff. And she's like, you're already doing it. I'm like, no, I'm not. And she's like, what do you call, you're holding your breath underwater, all your layered, underwater stuff, and, staring at the ocean, and all the stuff you're already doing. So it was a lot of acceptance into really what resiliency things I could use for myself, and really acknowledging that I needed to take care of myself was one. I had seen a counselor, but again, it was living in denial that I was fine, right? I'm a good husband. I'm a good captain. I'm a good dad, which wasn't the case at all, right? And so I went through a number of counselors. I think it's important for people to understand too, that we need to reach out, and you should have counseling, especially in our line of work or any line of work, right? You don't drive your car until, right, it seizes. You change the oil in it, you do some maintenance. Well, we work a lot on decon in the fire service, right? Why are we not deconning the brain, right? And that's where that came into. And I wasn't. I found a great counselor. He's just been revolutionary for me in helping in that regard. And ultimately, when I came to Days, I had to start practicing what I preached, right? I had to reach out and get help. I couldn't be the helper. Again, I was very bad at boundaries on multiple levels. And so overwhelming myself with a little bit of that. And so coming in and having Mike and my other buddy, Joe Hughes, helped me to establish boundaries, give me some direction, have that help. And then the big one was I got introduced to my good friend Kelly Norton-Gilchrist out of Denver Fire. She's retired Denver Fire, and she was a clinician prior to. We teach, and I was introduced to the RECESS program, which is Resilience Education and Coordination to Establish a Sustainable Support System. It's a mouthful. Kelly named it RECESS because we're all 12-year-olds old anyway. We want to go play. So she knew how to hammer home to the first responder world. And I got introduced to that. And I actually went through it myself and started to do the things that were in there because she trusted me to take it. And we were the first ones in our department at South County to run this program non-clinically. She ran it clinically at Denver Fire. And we'll talk more about that. But I was able to actually go through that resilience program, which is really a choose your own adventure. And I was actually able for the first time to be okay not being okay. And Kelly is also third generation fire also. So our resumes are very similar. So again, no coincidence in who we crossed paths with. And that opened a door for me. And now I was actually able to implement it. I was actually able to go through it and able to run it. And through my own course of action, I was able to do that. I also became inspired through what I was doing, that I became a certified performance breathwork coach. So I now do breathwork coaching for people, and using breathing and the breath is a very, very powerful way for us to not only downregulate, but also to change our neuro and physiological pathways. So I've been deep into that, and through my energy work and doing just different things that work for me, I was lucky enough to again, turned to my faith and my family, and fun are my priorities in life now. And I'm a different person. I quit drinking. I'm almost a year sober.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And I, teach their own. I was the guy that used to ride around, drinking Coors and, and it wasn't working for me. So I cut it off last November. And again, it's been game changer for me in that regard. So to have the ability and the clarity, right? I say the hardest thing we'll ever do is look ourselves in the mirror honestly. And to be able to do that, I had to actually realize, like, alcohol for me wasn't
Gasoline.
It wasn't a positive resiliency. There's nothing positive about it for me. And so my wife had been sober for 6 months, and I was very empowered to do it. And I wanted to be better for me and my kids. And so those things. And now I continue my resilience practice. In fact, my wife and I just, we went to my second or my third hot yoga session last night. So it's pretty rad. There's a lot of cool things that we can do out there.
Yeah, I will. I'll let, because Dan, being mental health professional himself, I think the point that I was trying to get at in the question was, one, I agree with you that we need to normalize, be it that we want to call it counseling, or normalize having conversation with people that can sit outside and help us see our world a little bit clearer.
Yeah.
So however you do that, whatever you want to call it, if you have to, it's almost like VES. If you got to change the name to make it, then you know what? As long as it's getting done, I'm not gonna fight you over it. But the other thing is that everybody's journey, how we go through it, and this is where I'm hoping Danny will jump in on this. Is like you didn't do inpatient treatment, which a lot of firefighters, that seems like to be the trend today in peer support. As soon as we have an issue, we want to get the individual off, be it that we're sending them to Center of Excellence or any of the other facilities that are out there. All of them are totally capable of dealing with it. And you went a different route. And it's great, because if it's working for you, each person is different, and how as long as that they are making progress and your progress. So, Dan, I'm just curious your thoughts, and Greg, just like inpatient versus outpatient, I think is one of the things that kind of comes up, and for guests that are listening, maybe somebody that might be struggling, like, well, man, I can't disappear for 30 days, with family life. So, Dan, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that, since you've coordinated it for years.
Yeah, so great question. But before we move on, I do want to ask for clarification from Greg for those people that are not in the Washington area. L&I.
Labor and industries. It's basically worker comp.
Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with it, but I just wanted to make sure that the general pop knows that. And I know it's cool because the Washington State Fire Council, right, has worked with the state to get that covered, and there's guidelines and so forth, but not every state is as advanced as Washington is currently. So great. I loved what you said in regards to symptomology, and I'd like to circle back on that, but as opposed to in the field of psychology, in order to be treated, right, and insurance to cover, someone has to be diagnosed. And with that diagnosis, fortunately and unfortunately, fortunately, you get it covered by the insurance, but unfortunately, there becomes a bias with the title. The reality is that everybody has symptomology, all of us included. What does that entail? And how, let's just use the word severe that is. These are all things that when somebody gets assessed, excuse me, it's like if you hurt your shoulder, you're like, I could work through it, right? It hurts. Pain is an indication that you shouldn't do that, right? And it's like in the brain, right? You said you were on red, but you thought you were on green because you're trained to work through the difficult parts. That's what our skill set is. But sometimes, and I won't say all the time, but sometimes to a deficit. When somebody goes in front of a therapist, a psychologist, a doctor, they ask a number of different questions to identify what potentially the issue is. I'm not going to say necessarily the problem, but the issue. What is the issue? Because problem has a negative connotation as well. Although in the military, we say work the problem. And in the fire service, we're going to work the scene. But you really have to identify what the issue is and then what the appropriate level of care is. You know this, Rob knows this, I know this. I, strangely enough, have been in this field for almost 4 decades. But if you look at growing up in an alcoholic family, I've been around this my entire life, looking at my father going, there's something going on. It doesn't appear normal. It's different, but he keeps on telling me it's okay. And I know anything that I say here, you're going to probably, like you did, smile, you're going to apply to yourself. Same thing I did, because it wasn't drinking, and I did get assessed for PTSD and don't have it, but I have a number of symptoms, and some of them have been as a result of childhood trauma, which again, if we do enough, if we invest ourselves enough into therapies, whether it be inpatient, outpatient, or individual counseling, or PHPs, and that's not what this discussion is about, but there is a appropriate level of care. The problem is then we have barriers because insurances don't want to pay for the higher one because it's more expensive. But sometimes, like if you have an injury, you have to immobilize that limb, because otherwise you're going to make it, what we say on the south side of Chicago, worser. So the way I would describe it is that if somebody just is not doing well in a general pop in life, and you talked about suicide, and there's a continuum on that, that person needs to be removed from all those things and be inpatient. My belief, personal, and Rob asked me this, and I would say this to anybody, even though we're on fire engineering, is that sometimes now inpatient treatment can be sexy. Like, hey, I've been there. On the other side is insurances don't want to necessarily pay for that as a first level of care. So now you have a brain organ that is struggling, and they're going to do the lesser level of care. And then you injure it more, and now it becomes complex. I don't want to lose everybody here, but I know you're following me, because you really go in to see a counselor, and you said the number one thing is that, trust and peers. And if you don't have that basis as a connection, you don't get to the higher level of therapy. So number one, I applaud you for the first step is picking up that phone, identifying it, then picking up the phone and asking for help. It sounds like you got a huge protective factor of your spouse currently. And then where do you go, right? And that's the thing that the general consensus that I have heard through decades in the fire service is like, who do I go to? Who do I trust? And I ran our union's EAP program for Chicago Fire, 8,000 members, 8,000 active and retired members, right? And they always said, who should I go to? Or no, yeah, who should I go to? And then coming to me, I'm like, why are you here? How'd you get here? And do you trust me? Because if you don't trust me, you're not going to listen to me. So it's fabulous that you mentioned the barriers and the benefits of experiencing individual therapists and what makes the connection there. And I'm assuming, like many people who have been very successful, now you actually look forward to it. Like, oh, I get to go talk to Rob, even though he wouldn't let me on his department. Yeah, that's going to be filtered in there every once in a while, Greg, just because we got to keep lighthearted. But you don't have to. I'm not always right, but most people are like, oh, I got to go to a therapist, and now it's like, hey, I get to go see, do my check-in. Is that fair?
100%. 100%. I have counseling tomorrow at 9 a.m. I'm looking forward to it. I just really enjoy meeting with them. Because it's part of my resiliency. It's part of my taking care of me is to clear that out, right? We have to be able to do that. So I don't bottle it up, so I can get it out. And Rob, I know you asked about it. It's interesting. And you talked about inpatient versus outpatient. I was too afraid to go to inpatient. I had too many excuses that I had to work overtime. I got to coach my kids. I got to do this. I got to do that. They're all BS, right? Because it's all fear-based. It's fear-based. It's afraid of we don't want to face that. I will say that looking back, knowing what I know now, I would have went. I would have went. And now that I didn't go, right? We talk about validity. Do I have the validity to tell somebody to go because I did? Well, you didn't go. Yeah, but I wish I would have. I wish I would have quit drinking sooner. I wish I would have asked for help sooner. I wish I would have reached out sooner. Here's why. And because of that, I've had 4 people that have gone. I had one person that went through recess, the program, non-clinical, right? And Kelly is our clinical oversight for our peer support team. So my peer support team, we have the trust now to say, if they don't know, they'll call me. If I don't know, I call Kelly, and we'll get that person where they need to go. We have the trust now of the organization. I worked with L&I to try to get some of these inpatient facilities covered. And when I tell them, no, you need to go and don't worry about it. The insurance will take care of it. Our HR department's working with, we'll cover it. These facilities are now saying, pay $20 a month. Like, you're going to pay something because there's buy-in, but the money's not it. And so now I get to tell people, like, no, this is valuable. And now these people are coming back, and guess what they're doing? Just like you said, Dan. What are they doing? They're the best ever. They're like, dude, I went through recess. They got through recess and they stabilized, and they had the resiliency to say, I need a higher level of care. And they went. And now they're coming back and they're preaching. And like you said, it's now no longer becoming this, I can't go. No, take 30, 45, 60, 90 days or whatever, short span, invest in your future. Right. And we're getting that buy-in now. So super powerful on both fronts. And I think we're doing a good job as we get the data and we study using resiliency, right? The triaging of it, right? Maybe you don't need to go talk to a counselor. Maybe you just need to have coffee with Rob, right? About he wanted me on his department, but the chief took somebody who had already worked there because of the short hiring. See, Rob, you're on my side.
I appreciate the support. Appreciate the support.
And, maybe there was, maybe that's all it took was that coffee, but we're going to follow up, right? Maybe we need to get you into counseling. Maybe we need to get you into recess. Maybe we need to get you into inpatient, right? And then there's the hard stops of, okay, we need to get somebody there. Now, our department's done an excellent job in the area with the local, with everything that we're going, right? I pick up the phone. We call the different inpatient facilities, whichever one's going to marry up best for them. And then it's, boom, we're gone, right? And we've got our union's paying for accompanying plane ticket. So someone's going to fly them there, put them off the plane, make sure they get there, and then fly back, right? My brother-in-law is a sergeant at SeaTac. They have a program that's bitching that you call their dispatch and say, I'm a first responder taking somebody to therapy, and they'll be like, perfect, put official business park here, they'll escort you through. This is the level that we're getting to now because of the work that you've laid over 40 years, right? That Rob did before he left, that I'm doing now. And being on here to share this, if you're out there, it's possible. And we can make this happen. And it's happening. And we're saving people's lives because of it.
On that note, let me read something to you. And again, I'm not a big reader. I don't have the brain and the capacity to focus that much, but I work for IFSI, Illinois Fire Service Institute, helped them with the resiliency program. And so I got an email today. It says, "Dear faculty, staff, at this point in the semester, student, faculty, and staff stress levels rise exponentially. Blah, 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 blah. Global events, exams, and deadlines, and the upcoming election could intensify feelings and anxiety and discomfort." So I won't go any further than that. There's a long paragraph, but you mentioned something that not everybody did believe years ago, where they would go in inpatient and go, "Okay, I'm reset, I'm done, I'm fixed." That's such a misconception and a fallacy that it'd be like saying in the fire service that, "Hey, I got it all, I'm done training," right? We've learned through NIOSH and OSHA and USFA and all the organizations out there that to prevent injuries and death, we have to train, and then when that's done, train some more. And that's what's cool about Rob, and that's what brought us together with my former organization and the Fools International, and how we can marry training in the behavioral health world. And that's what's so cool about having you on here, is that I'm sure in the academy you didn't go, "Okay, Greg is going to be a resiliency instructor." You know where I'm going with that.
100%.
Yeah. So I'm going to say a couple of things here, and then you've covered it. And for the audience out there, we always have kind of an agenda that we want to cover that's keep us on task. I have a tendency to go offline at times. And Rob, go ahead. That's a softball for you.
Not swinging.
We're we're pretty much on task. And along with that, you mentioned some key things here about PTSD being an injury. If you look at the psychological world with the DSM, they have to call it a disorder, but it's a brain injury, right? That doesn't happen typically in a single event. For us in the fire service, it's cumulative, and not just the job, but over a lifetime. And I'm not saying a death by 1,000 cuts, but a lot of different things that affect our brain organ. And really, the PTSD diagnosis is a brain injury. But you also mentioned too, as we get older, we have people that we care about that are close to us that have incidences that exponentially or synergistically catapult the effect even greater. And we feel that physically at times through hypervigilance, but don't realize it emotionally as we get stunted. Like, we have this high emotion, but we're taught in the fire service to not feel, but to do. And that dichotomy there just doesn't work really well. So we push everything down because we're told to go on the scenes of stuff and not feel. But the impact of you going on that one run, where that association from the psychology standpoint, and the pairing it back to your own family member, your daughter, as many people do, especially those people that then are on volunteer departments who respond to family and extended family and friends and so forth in their community, that just exponentially creates hypervigilance and ambivalence within the body, and we don't know what to do with it. If we don't have, and you mentioned this again, and I'm just repeating things that you did from an overt standpoint, but if we don't have the protective factors, if we don't have the coping skills, if we didn't practice emotional intelligence, if we didn't understand how to communicate our feelings, if we don't have somebody to bounce that off of, I'll just be pretty blunt. what the hell do you think is going to happen to us, right? Not you, but to us. So when I'm actually writing an article for Firefighter Nation, and it really equates the NIOSH 5 with trying to identify the events that lead to a line of duty death, and how it is very eerily similar to an emotional or psychological injury, like, accountability and risk versus reward and communication, all those different things. Anyhow, I said a lot, but you did in that rendition of your story cover a lot of things. I know that as you're, so tell me why you're smiling. Tell us why you're smiling.
Again, your phrasing and your wording is funny when you talk about bouncing off of us and being resilient and those things that happen. And it just kind of came to me. I use the analogy of a trampoline. When I teach this, I'll ask people like, hey, what is resiliency? What does it mean to you? Right. And like you said, I think we're recognizing that we've got to get ahead of it. So the beauty of what we're doing now, I think the shift is that we're not being reactive to this anymore. We're not reacting to, oh, so-and-so, went to the woods and killed himself, or they jumped off the bridge, or they like, oh, what are we going to do now? No, we're getting ahead of it because we understand truly the cumulative effect that it has, like you said. And so when you're saying that, I'm laughing because I use the analogy when I talk about resiliency. Everybody says, the classic Webster dictionary. What is resilience? Oh, it's the ability to bounce back. That's what everybody says. Yeah. So it just popped into my head, right? I'm like, yeah, well, it's like a trampoline, right? You jump on a trampoline, you land on it, it springs back, right? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So I said, let's take that. You want to use resilience as springing back? Let's take a trampoline, okay? We drop a 10-pound bowling ball on it. There's going to be impact and it's going to recoil, yeah? We take a 200-pound person and jump on it. There's going to be more, right? So those are the things that come at us at a cumulative nature. How do you minimize that? How about before we jump on the trampoline, we tighten the springs? How about we put new springs on? Those are the resiliency aspects that we can do so that when the 200-pound person jumps on the trampoline, guess what? There's going to be some recoil. There has to be. We're humans. We have emotion. We need to have that. But the recoil is going to be a 10-pound ball reaction, not a 200-pound human, because our springs are tighter. And we start looking at it from that aspect of being proactive, we can get ahead of this, right? We can give people the groundwork to start doing it, to say, I'm not okay, but what can I do? I use the analogy of my buddy who went and did equine therapy. He didn't even know what equine therapy was, and I don't even know what that is, but they went and did it, and he's like, I didn't know I liked horses. Now he does equine therapy. And so now when he's struggling, guess what he does? He acknowledges I'm struggling. I acknowledge that I'm hurting. I acknowledge that this could go bad, but instead of turning to the bottle, he goes and pets a horse, right? I do hot yoga. I do my breath work, right? I spend time with my ducks and chickens and wife and kids, right? And so that, when you were saying that, I'm like, yeah, we need to recognize the symptomology, right, ahead of it, acknowledge where we are with that common terminology, knowing it's okay not to be okay, and then give us all the tools. And what it really comes down to also, what I found out, is intentionality. Like my wife told me, you're already doing breath work, right? You're already doing mindfulness. You're just not saying it. I asked people in the room, how many of you guys do resiliency stuff? Room full of fire department people. I look at one guy, I'm like, dude, you CrossFit twice a day. What do you mean? Right? You have a family, you have a dog, you have kids, you have a hobby, you read, you do this, you do that. Give yourself the intentionality and the grace that I'm doing this for me to be better, right? To get ahead of this, to make myself more resilient, right? To be resilient another day. I can tighten those springs so that when the kid drives into the chain and I'm looking at my kid's face, I don't see my kid's face, because we have to. That's what makes us good at our job. We're the special forces of the civilian world. We have to compartmentalize. We don't have the option of being like, nope, sorry, ma'am, I don't do babies today. No, we take the baby and we lip lock them and we do everything we can. And then, because our springs are tighter, afterwards, that recoil is going to be less, but we know there's recoil. And as it comes back saying, this bothered me, and now we can get the help. And now it's okay. Now we can do more resiliency things. We can try different things. We can build on it. That's how we're starting to get that, right? Another catch, right? Now we're getting post-traumatic growth. Now we're getting a growth mindset. Now we're rewiring the brain so that they're impacting us less, right? And I know we don't have time to get into sympathetic versus parasympathetic and where all this stuff happens. But with me doing breath work, it's very powerful that we can get ahead of it, and that's going to cause a lower effect. It's still going to affect us. Not going to lie to you, right? You can't leave work at work and home. It's not possible. You can leave the jobs and the duties. You can't leave work. You can't do it. You're a human being with emotions. Have the emotions and feel. That's what makes us alive. How can we tighten the springs? That's how we get ahead of it.
Yeah, on that, because I know we are, we're about that the hour mark, but I want to hear a little bit more about recess without, getting into it real long. But I agree with you that in the last decade, we've done a better job in the fire service, the American Fire Service, of the intentionality of taking care of ourselves and our families and refocusing. But what is recess? How are you guys using it in your organization?
So, like I said, resilience education and coordination for establishing a sustainable support system, right? Recess. It's super powerful. And what it does is it focuses on the 8 areas of wellness. Okay. So you got the emotional, you got financial, you got environmental, you got intellectual, you have physical, occupational, social, and spiritual. So all 8 areas of wellness are covered. We don't look at just the physical or just the spiritual. We like to take it, and Kelly lets us run it non-clinical, which is awesome. So again, peer-to-peer, our peer supporters are the ones who are the recess guiders. It's a choose your own adventure. But what it is, she made a book, looks like a comic book. So it's fun. And we sit down and we go through hey, here's what it is. And we outline this whole program, and we have you make sure you're seeing a counselor. We have you check with your physician and make sure there's no medical things going on. And then what it is it's, like I said, it's a choose your own adventure. It's opening you up to things that you may not know, right? My buddy used the analogy of a wagon wheel. I don't like wagon wheels because they're rickety and they're rigid and they're break. I'm a surfer. I'm a water dog. I came up with the analogy of an octopus. No coincidence. It has 8 legs of an octopus. So my analogy for recess is an octopus. You got 8 legs. Those are the 8 areas of wellness. Highly intelligent brain. That's you, right? Super intelligent creature, super rad creature. Those 8 legs support you. Those are the 8 areas of wellness. So what's on every leg? Hundreds of tentacles. Those hundreds of tentacles are all the different things that you can do, right? You take environmental, for instance, where people are like, what do you mean environmental? Go outside, grounding, walk in nature, watch a sunrise, declutter your house, recycle, get rid of things that hold energy, right? Throw old t-shirts away that you've had. That one's for my wife because I'm working on it, right? There's hundreds of things that you can do in that one area to support that leg. What else about an octopus is so bitching is that it loses a leg. Just like we lose an area of wellness, those other 7 have to pick up the slack until that leg regenerates, which you can always regenerate. That area of wellness can always come back. And what we find is people say, I'm struggling with work, right? I'm struggling with work. Very common. Well, okay, let's dive into it. Maybe it's not just work. Maybe there's financial issues. Maybe there's intellectual issues. Maybe there's spiritual issues. Maybe there's, right? Maybe there's other issues that are happening that they're not even aware of. And what we've done is we've now exposed them to the intentionality of looking at wellness as a whole and giving them hundreds of different options, a choose your own adventure story. And the way we run it is we meet with a peer guider once a week. It's a 4 to 5 week program, depending on how they're doing. We meet with them. We give them a book. We go through it. We give them some things, some resiliency tips, some functional movement. I give them some breath work to work on. I give them some things out of this book, and then they go home. And they go home and have some things that they have to do, self-assessments, and they got to look at a stress continuum. And then they meet with me the next week, and then we build on it. And the beauty is we've had now 35 people run through it in my department. We've got our peer support team running through it right now, right? 2 of those people have gone to inpatient treatment because they said they were ready and willing to go. The other ones have said it kept them on the job, saved their marriage, saved their life, right? I call it the missing link because it's making that. We tell them, take this to your counselor, take this to your wife, take it to your husband, take it to your family, use it. And in the non-clinical set, what it is instead of turning to the bottle, they go get their comic book and they open it up and they're like, I don't journal, but what's a brain dump? Well, yeah, we talked about that. And they sit down and they start writing, and all of a sudden they're like, holy shit, that felt good. Oh man, I'm gonna do that again, right? Just like the equine therapy, just like, other things that you may not even think of, a crossword puzzle, reading a book, a podcast, all these different things that they had no idea. And they turned to this book, and just having the book and the structure, people said it saved their life, because they're like, I'm going to go get the book. And just by opening it is intentionality. And now we're getting them better. And we're focusing on all those 8 areas of wellness. And it's super powerful. In fact, it's great because Surfer, we're doing Seattle Fire's going to start the recess program. And so is Surfer this month or in November. Awesome. Yeah. So it's really cool.
Well, let me just, I this is a rhetorical question for me, but just for the listeners, how's the department supported? I mean, do they allow for you to take people offline? Do they pay their wage to have them come in and see you? I mean, what's your department doing about it?
So right now, the way we're running it was we're authorizing, basically we're going to pay them overtime because we'd rather them meet off duty. So they meet with the peer guide or off duty at their place of choosing. So I've met at coffee shops, I've met at their house, we've met wherever they're comfortable, because that's what matters. We've met at the beach in Edmonds, right? Super, super powerful, to sitting by the ocean, right? And we get an hour of overtime, and they get paid an hour of overtime to come meet and to do the work. So, and you look at that on a big thing, the national average right now is 4 months, right? 4 months is 4-month time loss for somebody who's dealing with a mental health injury. That's the national average. And we're keeping people on the job through a 4 to 5 week program, saving the department, hundreds of thousands of dollars in time loss. There's not even, I don't even know how you quantify the tangibility of a great human being, because now their home life's improving, their work life's improving, they're better. And right, we get that, right? And you tell 2 friends and they tell 2 friends. Yeah. And they're impacting people in the fire service. We haven't had it yet where we've needed to pull anybody offline. I know Kelly in Denver ran it that way. It was clinical because she was a clinician, and they'd come to training, be assigned to her. We haven't got there, and that's a testament to my organization, and I think to the area that people they're trusting us, and they're doing it, and we haven't had that quite yet. Yeah.
Now, I'm from our county, and I know one of the things we were working on before I had left was the idea of trying to embed, a clinician in the county or in the department, so that we had more access to them, rather than just when we would do something like, hey, I'm going to connect you with this individual. But are you guys moving in that direction?
Your groundwork, you've led the way. Surfer has a clinician that they're going to bring on board on contract to be the department clinician to offer that help. We are very fortunate that I have Kelly, who is a clinician, and her team through Dumpster Fire to do our clinical oversight of the peer support team, because I have 35 members and we're actively recruiting more right now, just on our peer support team. And then we actually hired, we just have a contract with another clinician to be our department clinician for clinical follow-ups, which would be, for people out there, we use the term team follow-ups and clinical follow-ups for debrief and CISM. We don't use those terms anymore. We're using follow-ups. We say we put the FU in follow-ups, which is facts and understanding. So it makes it a little bit more accessible. And so she runs clinical follow-ups, and then she does she's helping us do psychoed for addictions and things that we need her to come in from a clinical standpoint. And then the beauty is we're building that culturally competent clinician list, to where if we have someone who's struggling and we can't get a hold of someone, we can call her and she can be the stopgap until we can, again, get them farmed to a clinician that's going to suit them best.
Yeah. I mean, I could continue asking questions. There's a lot we could go on and on and on. And I'm looking at the clock right now, so we're butting up against the end. But I just want to say, I know Dan might have a closing question, but I just want to say, Greg, I appreciate you coming on and chatting with us and sharing your experience. And I appreciate the fact that things are still moving in the right direction in our county, and that you guys and along with my department are moving forward and being leaders of it. And was pretty cool to hear and to see.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your mentorship and your friendship. And, you really led the groundwork for that. And we still now have all carrying the torch, all the leads of the peer supports in South Snohomish County. We're still meeting and we're working on going that direction of all working, to have a regional approach. So like regional task force and cross-referencing each other's team so that we can get the most level of help to everybody. So thank you for all the work you've done and for having me on here, buddy. I mean, it means the world.
That's rad.
That was I don't know what you're paying them, but that was really nice. We were talking about emotion, but that was way too fuzzy for me. No.
I know you. I know that's not fuzzy.
It's kind of like my picture right now because the sun's coming out, and I have to protect myself. Cap, thanks a lot for this. I do have a kind of a closing statement. There's so much that you covered through your journey, and what I hope that a lot of the people take away from is that, and I'd like to think that you're better for it, and that's the impression that I get is you don't hold anything back. You are who you are today because of what you've been through, and you have no difficulty having a conversation about it. And that's why Rob wanted to bring you on here. When Rob mentioned that he wanted to talk to you and talk about resilience, sometimes I get a little cringe because, right, resilience, and you mentioned it, the ability to, the definition in Webster, the ability to bounce back, I think is so imperfect. And resilience, if you look it up, right, you could look at the 6 points, 7 points, the 5 pillars, the 4 pillars, the 8 points, and you gave a great description of 8 points. But just to give people an idea of when resilience isn't just resilience, we're looking at emotional, social connectivity, cognitive flexibility, problem solving, mindfulness, optimism, strong relationships. And then you get into key things like self-awareness and self-care and purpose, reframing, focus, hope, coping. And then a key thing that you said, which not a lot of people do say, so I applaud you for this, is the intentionality of it, is that don't do it because somebody else told you to do it, because most of us then push back at that just because of the way we are, good and bad, right? But intentionally each day we have to wake up each morning and go, this is what I'm going to do. And I didn't get an A all through college. It partly was because I didn't study enough and read enough, and I still don't enough. And so I know that for myself, but I still want to win at what I'm doing. So like when I'm in golf, I'll practice a little bit more before I go out and have a match so that I can win. And yeah, that's a personal thing. I kind of digress a little bit. But you also mentioned breath work, which some people will be like, oh, okay, breathing. What are you talking about? What I ask people is that for all of us that have played sports, and then for all of us that have been in the fire service, what's the one thing that we always do to try to, and I won't even necessarily say reset our autonomic nervous system, but to try to pull it back so that we can have a bit of control, and that is breathing. That is a involuntary, voluntary behavior that you can use that doesn't cost you a damn thing to help you reset. We do that, so, and you mentioned hot yoga, and I've yet to, I think about it, but I haven't done it yet because I haven't got the yoga pants, and I'm married, and I don't want to see grown men in yoga pants, and I can't look at women. Anyhow, digress again. Sorry, Rob. But what I've learned about yoga is originates from breathing and teaches you that. I won't get into it. So all that stuff is tied in. Not a single one thing that you said is going to get you or anybody else to the point that you're at. You've, in this hour, have talked about a lot of different things. If I look back to when I made the conscious decision to begin to change my construct and my journey to be a better person than I thought I was, and that was the better part of about 6 or 7 years ago. It wasn't one thing. It was, I'm just going to 20 different things. So thank you for being vulnerable. And again, Rob and I have talked about this. Vulnerability is not getting in front of people and just being a topper and telling them a person's hard story, because if you go in any group, your story, not yours, Greg, but most of our stories is nothing compared to the hard knocks that a lot of people have been through. That's not what vulnerability is about. Vulnerability is to have these tough conversations and let the next generation know that they don't have to go home carrying all that stuff and not being able to talk about it. And that's what you have done and helped us do in this show today. So thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Greg,
Yes,
do you
sir.
want, so if anybody wants to reach out, talk about your department or talk about R.A.D Consulting, you got any contact information you want to share with us?
I do. You can reach out to me at radtraining10@gmail.com, or you can find me on social media on Instagram or TikTok at stay.rad10. You can find me there and reach out to me anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm more than happy to share or help you with peer support, resiliency aspects, talk about recess, or share my story, or help you with what we've done in our organization that's worked to help you get buy-in and that kind of thing.
Awesome. Dan, TikTok is a program where you can share videos and
No, that's what my clock does.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have to help Dan out every once in a while with some of the stuff.
What did you just say?
All right. You want to close? Go ahead.
I want to say thank you guys, and thank you to everybody out there, and just know you're not alone. You can be resilient another day. And if I could leave you with anything, breathe and have gratitude. If you can have gratitude in your heart every day, and just one time a day, all I'm asking you to do is just say, I'm grateful for, insert whatever comes to your heart. And it could be you could be your wife, your kids, your job. You could be cheesy. You could be like I was the other day, like, dude, I'm grateful for this clean pair of sheets that I just put on my bed because I slept like a baby. Do that once a day, and I promise you it'll change your life. And it'll start you on the road to being resilient another day. And as always, thank you guys, and stay rad.
Yeah, glad to be here.
All right. Well, that's thanks again, Cap. Rob, always a pleasure. And before this sun whitewashes me, thanks to Fire Engineering. And that's a wrap for Straight Talk at Fire Engineering.